My name is Caroline Warren, and at 29, I thought I had my life figured out. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, lived in a modest apartment downtown, and drove a reliable but unremarkable Honda Civic. To everyone around me, I appeared to be just another struggling creative trying to make ends meet. What they didn't know was that my grandmother had left me a substantial inheritance 3 years ago, including a portfolio of premium real estate properties across the city. I kept this information private, preferring to live simply and see people's true colors without the influence of money clouding their judgment. My best friend since college, Jessica Martinez, had always been the flashy one in our group. She worked in marketing for a tech startup, flaunted designer handbags, and constantly posted about expensive dinners and weekend getaways on social media. Jessica had a way of making subtle comments about my budget lifestyle, always offering to help me out with job connections or suggesting I should aim higher in my career choices. I tolerated these remarks because I valued our friendship, but looking back, I can see the condescension was always there, lurking beneath her seemingly supportive facade. When I got engaged to my boyfriend Marcus last spring, Jessica was the first person I called. Marcus, a high school teacher, was as down-to-earth as I was, and we'd been planning a simple but elegant wedding. I was genuinely excited to share my ideas with Jessica, especially since she'd always claimed to be my closest friend. Over coffee at our usual spot, I pulled out my wedding planning notebook, filled with months of research, venue contacts, vendor recommendations, and carefully curated design concepts. I'd spent countless hours developing a cohesive vision that perfectly reflected Marcus and me as a couple, rustic elegance with vintage touches. Jessica listened intently as I showed her everything. The botanical illustrations I'd designed for the invitations, the specific color palette of dusty rose and sage green, the mason jar centerpieces with eucalyptus garlands, and most importantly, my dream venue, Willowbrook Estate, a historic mansion with sprawling gardens that I'd discovered during a weekend drive. The venue was perfect, but expensive, and I'd been saving every penny to make it happen. Jessica seemed genuinely excited for me, taking photos of my planning pages for inspiration and promising to help however she could. I trusted her completely, never imagining she would use my vulnerability against me. 2 weeks later, Jessica announced her engagement to her longtime boyfriend David with a massive social media post featuring a ring that probably cost more than my annual rent. The timing seemed coincidental until I started noticing similarities between her wedding posts and my carefully planned ideas. First, she posted about choosing dusty rose and sage green as her colors. Then came photos of mason jar samples and eucalyptus arrangements. When she shared a picture of Willowbrook Estate with the caption, "Found the perfect venue," my heart sank. She had systematically stolen every element of my wedding vision and was executing it with her unlimited budget. The betrayal cut deeper because of how she handled it. When I confronted her via text, asking about the similarities, she responded with laughing emojis and wrote, "Great minds think alike. Besides, these are pretty basic wedding trends. It's not like you invented Dusty Rose." When I mentioned Willowbrook Estate specifically, she became defensive, claiming she found it through her own research and that I didn't have a monopoly on venues. Her dismissive attitude made it clear she felt entitled to take my ideas simply because she could afford to execute them better. The woman I'd considered my closest friend had reduced my months of heartfelt planning to basic trends. ... What made Jessica's theft even more infuriating was her public execution of my stolen vision. She hired the city's most expensive wedding planner, booked premium vendors I could only dream of affording, and began posting daily updates about her original wedding concepts. She even started a wedding Instagram account, gaining thousands of followers who praised her innovative style and unique aesthetic choices. Meanwhile, I felt paralyzed. unable to use my own ideas without appearing to copy her more extravagant version. Her wedding was scheduled for 6 months before mine, which meant she'd debut our vision first, making me look like the imitator. The situation became unbearable when Jessica started giving unsolicited advice about my budget wedding. She'd make comments like, Caroline, you don't have to try so hard to compete with my vision. Just do something simple that fits your lifestyle. She suggested I consider a community center venue and artificial flowers to save money. Her condescending tone made it clear she viewed herself as the superior bride with superior taste and resources. Our mutual friends began comparing our weddings, often praising Jessica's elevated version of what they saw as common elements, without knowing she'd stolen everything from me. As Jessica's wedding approached, her social media presence became insufferable. She posted daily content about her journey creating the perfect wedding, taking credit for every detail I'd carefully planned. She even started giving wedding advice to other friends, positioning herself as an expert in elegant rustic design. The botanical illustrations that had taken me weeks to perfect became her signature style. The eucalyptus and mason jar combination she claimed to have pioneered was actually my grandmother's idea from her own 1950s wedding. Watching Jessica profit socially from my creativity while positioning herself as the trendsetter was devastating. The breaking point came 3 weeks before Jessica's wedding, when she posted a photo tour of Willowbrook Estate, claiming she'd discovered this hidden gem through extensive research. She detailed how she'd convinced the owners to let her book their most exclusive date, acting as though her negotiation skills had secured this impossible booking. In reality, I knew the venue was nearly impossible to book on short notice, especially for her preferred date in peak wedding season. Her post felt like a final insult, taking credit not just for finding the venue, but for some imaginary business acumen in securing it. What Jessica didn't know was that I owned Willowbrook Estate. My grandmother had purchased the property in the 1970s as an investment, and it had been in my family ever since. I managed the bookings through a property management company to maintain my privacy, but I had complete control over the calendar and contracts. Jessica had indeed booked the venue through the proper channels, submitting her application and deposit like any other client. The management company, following standard procedures, had approved her booking without consulting me personally. It wasn't until I saw her social media posts that I realized what had happened. The irony was delicious. Jessica had stolen my wedding vision and was now planning to execute it at my own venue, completely unaware of the connection. She had no idea that the exclusive booking she was bragging about was entirely at my discretion. As I reviewed her contract through my property manager, I discovered she'd requested numerous expensive upgrades and modifications, clearly planning to spare no expense in outdoing my original concept. Her deposit alone was substantial, and she'd committed to additional fees that would make this one of our most profitable bookings of the year. I spent days considering my options. Legally, Jessica had a valid contract, and breaking it without cause would be unethical and potentially costly. But as I read through the terms and conditions, I remembered a clause my lawyer had insisted on including. Bookings could be canceled if the client engaged in behavior detrimental to the venue's reputation or violated the property's community standards. This clause was designed to protect us from problematic clients. But it also gave me leverage if I could demonstrate that Jessica's actions warranted cancellation under these terms. The solution came to me while reviewing Jessica's social media posts about the venue. She had been posting unauthorized photos of the interior spaces, taken during her site visit, despite signing an agreement that prohibited sharing images without written permission. She'd also tagged the venue's location repeatedly, something we specifically asked clients not to do to maintain exclusivity. More importantly, her posts misrepresented facts about the venue's history and availability, potentially misleading other prospective clients. These violations gave me the legal justification I needed to cancel her booking without appearing vindictive. I decided to wait until 1 week before her wedding to take action. This timing would maximize the impact while giving me plausible reasons for the delay in addressing her contract violations. I instructed my property manager to document all of Jessica's social media violations and prepare a formal cancellation notice citing breach of contract terms. The letter would reference her unauthorized photo sharing, improper social media usage, and misrepresentation of venue policies. It would be professional, legally sound, and devastating to her wedding plans. During this waiting period, Jessica's behavior became increasingly insufferable. She started hosting wedding planning parties, where she'd show off her stolen ideas to our friend group, positioning herself as a creative genius who developed this aesthetic from scratch. She'd make pointed comments about how some people lack the vision to execute elegant concepts properly, obviously referencing my more modest budget. Her condescension reached new heights when she offered to let me borrow some of her leftover decorations after her wedding, as if she were doing me an enormous favor by sharing my own ideas back with me. The week before Jessica's wedding, I had my property manager send the cancellation notice. The letter was professionally worded, but devastating in its implications. It detailed her contract violations, referenced specific social media posts as evidence, and terminated her booking effective immediately. The cancellation included forfeiture of her deposit due to the breach of contract, and noted that the venue was no longer available for her requested date. The letter suggested she seek alternative accommodations and wished her well in her future endeavors, maintaining a tone of professional regret rather than personal animosity. Jessica's reaction was exactly what I'd anticipated. She called the property management office in hysterics, demanding to speak with the owner and threatening legal action. When they explained that the owner was unavailable and that the cancellation was final based on documented contract violations, she began calling everyone in our friend group, claiming she was the victim of discrimination or a competitor's sabotage. She posted dramatic social media updates about vendor betrayal and wedding industry corruption, positioning herself as an innocent victim of circumstances beyond her control. Watching Jessica scramble to find an alternative venue 1 week before her wedding was oddly satisfying. Peak season meant most quality venues were booked solid, and the few available options were either significantly more expensive or far below her standards. Her frantic social media posts showed her desperation as she contacted venue after venue, only to be turned away. The botanical illustrations, eucalyptus arrangements, and mason jar centerpieces she'd stolen from me suddenly seemed meaningless without the perfect backdrop she'd planned to showcase them against. The real revelation came 2 days later when Jessica, in her desperation, called me directly. Through tears, she begged me to help her find connections in the wedding industry, completely unaware that I owned the very venue that had rejected her. She apologized for any tension between us and promised we could work together to make both our weddings beautiful. Her voice was different, vulnerable, and genuinely remorseful, as she admitted she might have been inspired by my ideas more than she'd initially acknowledged. For the first time since our friendship began, Jessica was treating me as an equal whose help she genuinely needed. I maintained my composure during the call, expressing sympathy for her situation, while carefully avoiding any mention of my connection to Willowbrook Estate. I suggested a few alternative venues I knew were available, though none matched the elegance she'd been planning. Jessica's gratitude was palpable as she thanked me for being such a good friend despite our recent tensions. She even mentioned that going through this crisis had made her realize how much our friendship meant to her, and she hoped we could get past any misunderstandings about wedding planning similarities. The final twist came at Jessica's hastily rearranged wedding, held at a hotel conference center that was a significant downgrade from Willowbrook Estate. Despite her best efforts to maintain the aesthetic she'd stolen from me, the venue couldn't accommodate her vision properly. The botanical illustrations looked out of place against generic hotel decor. The eucalyptus arrangements seemed overdone in the small space, and the mason jar centerpieces appeared cluttered rather than elegant. What had been a cohesive, beautiful concept in my original planning became a mismatched collection of elements that didn't work well together in their new environment. During the reception, I overheard several guests commenting on the venue change and the awkward aesthetic choices. Some mentioned that the decorations seemed trying too hard or not quite right for the space. A few people even asked me privately if I thought Jessica's style choices were odd, since they'd heard I was also planning a wedding. The irony was perfect. Jessica's theft of my ideas had backfired completely, making her wedding appear poorly planned and aesthetically confused rather than elegant and sophisticated. The most satisfying moment came during Jessica's speech to the wedding party. She thanked everyone for their support during the venue crisis and mentioned how the experience had taught her that weddings weren't about perfect locations, but about love and friendship. She specifically thanked me for being such a loyal friend during her difficult time, praising my generosity and support when she needed it most. The applause that followed felt like vindication. Jessica was publicly acknowledging my value as a friend, completely unaware that I had orchestrated her venue disaster. My own wedding at Willowbrook Estate 6 months later was everything I'd originally envisioned. The botanical illustrations looked perfect against the venue's historic architecture. The eucalyptus and mason jar centerpieces created exactly the atmosphere I'd planned. And the dusty rose and sage green palette complemented the gardens beautifully. Guests repeatedly commented on the originality and elegance of our choices, with several asking for vendor recommendations to recreate similar aesthetics for their own events. Jessica attended as a guest and was genuinely complimentary, though I could see her recognizing elements from her own failed wedding. During our reception, Jessica pulled me aside to apologize more formally for the tension during our engagement period. She admitted she'd been competitive and might have borrowed too heavily from my ideas, acknowledging that she should have been more supportive of my original vision. Her apology felt genuine, born from the humbling experience of her venue crisis and the contrast between our wedding's success levels. She expressed hope that we could rebuild our friendship on more honest ground, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was talking to the person I'd originally befriended. I never told Jessica about owning Willowbrook Estate, and I never planned to. The lesson she learned about friendship, originality, and respecting others' ideas was more valuable than any revelation about my hidden wealth could provide. She still doesn't know that her venue crisis was actually justice served by the friend she'd betrayed. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge is the kind where the guilty party never realizes they've been held accountable by the very person they wronged. The experience changed our entire friend group's dynamic. Jessica became notably more humble and considerate, often asking before offering advice or making assumptions about others' circumstances. Our mutual friends began treating both of us more equally, no longer automatically deferring to Jessica's opinions about style or sophistication. The incident had subtly redistributed social power within our circle, creating space for more authentic relationships based on genuine support rather than superficial competition. Looking back, I realized that Jessica's theft of my wedding ideas was actually a gift in disguise. It revealed her true character while giving me the opportunity to demonstrate grace under pressure and ultimately achieve perfect justice. My hidden ownership of Willowbrook Estate provided the means for natural consequences, but it was Jessica's own contract violations that created the justification for her downfall. The revenge was satisfying precisely because it was fair, proportionate, and ultimately educational rather than purely punitive.